Welcome to the podcast of course, they make me crazy. We grew up with a bipolar mother addicted to pills who experienced a lot of hardships. We started this podcast to talk about our experiences with you. You can really start to feel lost and trapped in their world. And we're hoping our crazy, sometimes funny stories, living with someone like that, helps you to feel normal, whole, and happy again.
Hi, everyone. I'm April. Thank you so much for joining us on Of Course They Make Me Crazy. Amanda's not here this week, but she'll be back soon. This week, however, I'm talking to a friend of mine, Tracy. I was her real estate agent. That's what I do for a living. And we began to get to know each other as we were looking at houses. Tracy has a couple of fascinating stories I think could really help you maybe put some things into perspective in your life. One being that she grew up with a bipolar grandmother who really wasn't all that loving, pretty much just kind of mean. And that really affected Tracy's self-esteem growing up and others around Tracy. And she also has another crazy story. Tracy and her family recently went through a devastating time. And as we were all learning that COVID was an epidemic, that is exactly when they were dealing with a double whammy. Her brother-in-law got so high on meth that he shot and killed his girlfriend while his 16-year-old kid was home. He told police he killed her because she was trying to stop him from aligning the planets. So that's just a little introduction. And hi, Tracy. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, April. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay. So I first want to start off by saying what a kind and amazing woman you are. You've been married to the same man since how old were you guys? You were teenagers, right?
Yes, I was 19 and he was 17.
Wow. And, I just watching, your family, we all looked at houses together. You're all so close. Your grandchildren adore you. You all spend a lot of time together, which is so refreshing to see because, not a lot of families do. A lot of families do, but not a lot of families do.
Yeah.
But let's start off with you telling me a little bit about your grandma.
Well, first off, I never realized anything was wrong with my grandmother. I just thought she wasn't a nice person. My mom was single and she had to raise my sister and I, who are 11 months apart, by herself. And then, during that period of time, we had to live with my grandparents for a period because, my mom struggled having two babies. And about sometime in my grandmother's 40s, she had a nervous breakdown. So then she started to display these OCD behaviors. My mom and I were talking this morning, and she said that my grandmother was convinced that there were caverns in the basement, which there weren't. She'd spend hours locked in the bathroom and she wouldn't come out. And it affected my grandfather because he couldn't even get in the bathroom to get ready for work.
Oh. What is a cavern? What is that?
Like a cave, like caves.
Okay.
Or basement, yeah. And then she would just straighten things over and over again. And this I remember even, later on in life when she'd be at my house. She'd just re-straighten everything on the counters over and over again, even though they didn't need to be. She'd wash her hands so much that they'd bleed. And then even a little bit later on, when my mom got her own apartment, my grandmother would babysit us, and she'd get a switch or a really thin tree branch off the tree outside. And as we'd walk by her, she'd just hit us with it, for no reason. And so, we had to deal with that. And then she affected my uncle because she really convinced my uncle that girls were bad. So, my uncle, to our knowledge, my uncle never had a girlfriend. And it wasn't until he was probably close to 50 that he let us know that he was engaged and he was going to get married. And at first, he wasn't even going to have a wedding because he felt he had to invite my grandmother. And he just couldn't do that. So, I think he realized that he didn't have to invite her and he could have his wedding. So he finally did. But so he didn't get married until he was in his 50s.
And so he didn't wait for her to pass to get married. He
No.
went ahead and
No,
Oh, wow.
no, he did, and he didn't want her to ever know his phone number, his address. He actually finally decided, I think his fiance had convinced him, well, I want to get married, let's get married. So, they finally did.
So she had that much influence on him to really honestly make him think that girls were not good until he got older.
Yes, she was very, sex was bad.
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure she ended up pregnant with my mother, before wedlock. And, so I think she really hated that about herself. And so she just thought like the opposite sex for either person, was, just so bad. You shouldn't have any interest. And just really, it kind of affected all of us.
Wow. And so did she instill the same scare into your mom, or did your mom just not buy it?
I think she did, but my mom kind of got into drugs some and left home young, got pregnant with my sister. I'm not sure if she was married yet at that point, but then my sister and I do have the same father, but he left while she was pregnant with me. And so my mom was left with two babies, and I never knew my father. I didn't meet him until I was a teenager. But yeah, so I really think it did. And since then, my mom has never dated or remarried. So that's in the 46 years of my life.
Wow. Never even dated?
She might have dated just a tiny bit, but I think when I was a teenager, but other than that, no, nothing significant.
Oh my goodness. It's kind of interesting because you and I somewhat have similar stories where, my mom ran with my biological father, who was kind of a bad dude, and she had me and my brother with him at 15 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's when the family, when everything was going down with them, when they learned my grandfather was, gay, and that he was leaving the family for his lover that he met at the nudist beach. And, grandma kind of had a meltdown too. I mean, you can only imagine, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Lord have mercy. My grandmother, she never remarried. And I just think that's, just lonely and sad. She certainly tried to find a boyfriend all the time, but grandma was kind of a little dirty birdie sometimes too. But wow. Okay. So when your grandma was thinking that there's caverns and caves down in the basement, was she barricading anything, or was she down there digging, or did she just think that was there?
Not that I remember. My mom was just telling me this morning that, that's what she was convinced, and they had to keep telling her, no, there's nothing in the basement. I didn't even remember that until my mom was telling me this morning. And then she even said if I got in touch with my uncle, he'd really have stories to tell. So I can't imagine what all she
Had done with him. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So did your mom, I mean, I know she probably had no other choice but to leave you kids with her mom being a single, mom herself.
Mhm.
Did she ever stress about doing that?
Well, my mom, I think she did, because we were very poor, and my mom refused to work full time because she wanted to be at home with my sister and I as much as possible. So she worked enough so that, we could pay bills. We got housing assistance, so we got help with our rent. We had food stamps, medical assistance. So we got all of that. So because she didn't want to be working all the time, even though financially we would have been better off, she knew emotionally we wouldn't be.
Absolutely. And then when your grandma had the switch, did she ever say why she was doing it, or did she just kind of come out of nowhere and smack you
No,
with it?
she would just sit in the chair,
Uh-huh.
and and watch us, she had this look that it was almost like a zombie type look, and it like she was just out of it, and she would sit there, and then we'd walk by and she would just snap us with it, and we dreaded when she had to watch us, because it was just a nightmare. If the only thing that would make her happy was if we just sat and didn't say a word.
Right. And do you think that would even have made her happy?
I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, let's just be real.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's terrible. And so your grandmother didn't find, so then come to find out years later that she is bipolar, but there was the longest time where no one really knew what was wrong with her, right?
No, we had no idea, we just, we were just convinced that she didn't love us, that she just was mean. She, criticized us constantly. Everything we did was wrong. My mom was a bad parent. I was a bad parent. It was just stressful whenever we had to deal with her, but we just thought, well, this is life. This is family. So we just did the best we could.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she even got to be so mean to you. You were saying that she was going to call child services on you.
Yes, because she always thought everything I did with my kids was wrong, but my son was always a picky eater. And, he was maybe between 1 and 2, and he liked his milk. But he didn't eat a lot. And so I would let him drink milk. And actually his son is the exact same way. And so, and she thought I was abusing him because I was giving him too much milk. And I believe that she did call somebody on me and, tell them that, I was abusive.
Oh my God. Did they ever come out?
No,
Okay.
no. Yes, because I even lived with my in-laws for a while we were saving up for a house, and we were in a very tiny apartment in their basement, and my daughter had to sleep on, I don't know if it was the couch, or sometimes she would sleep upstairs, up at my in-laws. And my grandmother just thought that was the worst thing, that I was just the worst parent because she thought I was making my children sleep on the floor.
Did you ever say, Grandma, I don't take a switch to my kids' rear ends? Did you ever mouth back off to her?
Only once in a while, because I was a lot like my grandfather. I would never, I didn't really respond to her. I just tried to be positive and just tried to deal with her the best that I could. And that's how my grandfather was. He would just keep quiet, and he would just, just go with the flow and do what needed to be done. My sister and my uncle and my mother, they were the ones that they would just lash back at her. And I never saw any good come out of it.
Yeah.
And I never saw any change. It never made a difference with her actions. So I just didn't waste my time.
Yeah, it's probably smart. And so your grandfather, do you think he truly loved your grandmother, or do you think he just thought, well, this is who I married and that's who I'm going to stay with?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I thought about that question, I really, truly do not know if my grandfather loved my grandmother. And it's sad to think about it now as an adult, because I would hope that he did. But I feel like he just realized that was his responsibility. And he stayed around, and he was always there to support the family. And he took great care of my sister and I. He was a big part of our life. So I think one reason could have been that he stayed for us.
And, because you were saying that she would chase him around the kitchen, right? And just kind of scream at him for no reason.
Yeah, she would follow him around, and she would just belittle him. And berate him, call him an idiot, just everything he did. He'd go outside to do yard work, and she'd follow him out there. And that was what she did. Constant.
And that really affected your self-esteem, and I would assume it had affected his too.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my grandfather never said anything. He never complained, never. So so we didn't really know what was on his mind, because
Right.
he even when he got sick and eventually passed away, we never even knew he was sick because he never complained.
Mm.
So this was a person that, we just didn't know how he was feeling, how it affected him. I mean, the rest of us, we just hated ourselves, so I can only imagine how he felt.
Yeah. And why do you say that? Why do you say that y'all hated yourselves?
Um, just being around somebody who's supposed to be, this part of your family that criticizes you constantly. I was either too fat or too thin. I wasn't as smart as everybody else.
She was diagnosed bipolar. What was like the breaking point that caused her to get diagnosed?
Um, she was still living on her own, and she just got to the point where she just lay on the couch all day, sleep. She wouldn't eat. We'd go and visit her, and just to get her off the couch was like a chore. And so I think that's when my mom finally took her to the doctor. And in discussing, all her behavior, and them looking into it, they realized, she was bipolar. And then she was institutionalized for a little while so that they could try to get her on medication and get her, so because she was letting herself die basically.
Hmm.
uh, and so that just wasn't normal. um,
And that
you know
was when your grandfather passed away, is that right?
it was after, yes. uh,
Okay.
because my grandfather died the day I got married, so that was in 94. So this didn't happen until, she died in 2016. So it was only a couple years before that she was diagnosed with bipolar.
And then you said something like when your grandfather passed away, so did the car.
Yeah, yeah.
The car
And that was,
died, and he did,
yes,
and you were
yes.
thankful for that. And why? What? Tell us about that.
Uh, yes, that was such a blessing. Not necessarily to her, but to us, because when my mom never drove with us when we were growing up, she didn't get her license until I got married. So my grandmother and my grandfather would take us everywhere. But my grandmother, when she would drive us around, she had the worst road rage. If somebody cut her off or if somebody was going too slow, she'd just ram right into them. So it was just horrible. Like, she would ram into them and just drive away, so uh, yeah. So we dreaded having to go anywhere with her if she was driving. But that was our only option,
Right.
so we were really stuck at that point.
Oh my God, did it come down to the point of like when you guys were young that you were embarrassed to see friends?
Oh, yes. Yes, because when I was thinking about this, I remember, because everybody was bad. Like, people she didn't know were bad. So some days after school, my sister and I would have to walk to my grandparents' house, because my mom would be working. And sometimes we walked with our school friends because we were all going to like the same neighborhood. And she would come out and she would scream at them and tell them like to get away from us. And
Oh God.
oh, it was very embarrassing.
Oh Lord, my God, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I get
Yeah.
that. I get that. Do you think if you early on, if you knew she was bipolar, do you think you would have thought of yourself and what she was telling you differently?
Um, Probably somewhat.
Mhm.
Maybe I would have realized earlier on that I wasn't as worthless, or we weren't as worthless as she kept trying to convince us that we were. Maybe if she would have gotten on medication sooner, um, she would have been kinder to us. But back then, the 70s, the 80s, it
Yeah.
was just, there's always been so much stigma around mental illness
Mhm.
and medication and things like that. So I just don't know how we would have reacted, and if it would have made much of a difference, other than maybe we wouldn't have taken her as seriously.
Right, absolutely. No, and you and I were talking about that too. It's like, I think back then, and I'm still sure today people feel this way, Trace, but it's like, can't you just get better? Can't you
Yes.
just not have to take that stuff?
Yeah.
And, I think I felt that way. I mean, I think I carried a lot of anger towards my mom because I felt that she should have always been the vibrant young mom that I grew up with, you know. And so when she got addicted to pain pills and everything else, I always loved her, but I started at times not to like her. It's like when the matriarchs of the family are dealing with that, it's a trickle down effect to so many. And yeah, there was such a stigma that, especially I think, you know, growing up in Pennsylvania, Cleveland, Ohio area, you know, around that we're kind of hard-headed people when it comes to not understanding or really not being, how do I say it? We have this way about us, you know,
Yeah.
suck it up, buttercup kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Because people's mentality, I really feel back in Pennsylvania, is snap out of it. You know, if you put your mind to it, you know, if you just try, you can snap out of it. And when it comes to mental illness, that's not how it works.
Absolutely. And let's talk about how tricky she could be. So you guys put her in a facility, and that was to try to get her, you know, on a good path. And here's the thing with them, right? Like, we think that they're not very attentive to certain things by our bipolar loved ones. Because they're all over the place, you know, sometimes, you know. And like my mom was bebopping around the house. I mean, when she was on her high, you know, she was upstairs, downstairs, cleaning out one drawer, going upstairs and then cleaning out the drawer in the bathroom. It was not a consistent, I'm going to clean out the kitchen. She was cleaning out the house, right?
Yes.
And so, but when it comes to certain things, they're very attentive.
It was so funny because, and it was like her hearing was like superhuman. So we'd be trying to, like, you'd think she wasn't even paying attention, and we'd be like whispering in the corner, and she would know exactly what we were saying, you know. So she was on, you know, had a schedule for her medication, and she was, finally, you know, able to go home. We ended up putting her in, you know, housing for the elderly. So she still was on her own, but had at least, you know, people around.
Yeah.
And so we had her medication written down, the schedule, because we ended up having to start having some in-home care come in. And she knew what each of her medication was for and had written it next to her schedule. And where the medication was for bipolar, she had written bipolar, and she had written do not take, you know. So she was very aware of what was going on. And she would give us a horrible time when we tried to give her medication.
Is that where she thought that somebody stole her false teeth? And
Yes. She was in, you know, her own apartment, and she was still at the point where we didn't have to have somebody there all the time. So she was on her own. And we had found out, I think my mom had stopped by to see her. And it's funny, when I was thinking about this, I actually have a picture on my phone of the day my mom came over and was telling me this story, that she called the police because somebody stole her false teeth. And they were just under her couch. I think my mom got there, and she was carrying on, and she had called the police. And so my mom searched, and they just had kind of gotten kicked under the couch or something.
Well, did they show up?
I don't know. I do not think so.
Oh my gosh. And, you know, I think we were talking too, that they can put on such a facade, right? In regards to, Amanda and I had this doctor on, or we're going to, he was talking about how when you grow up with somebody like this, it gets really confusing for us loved ones, and really frustrating, because they're so nice to the outside world. Once they go out to the outside world, because I don't know about your grandma, but my mom was very, she started to get to a point where she shut off and didn't want to create any friends.
Yes.
And and just really, you know, was always cried that she was so lonely. But never
Mhm.
wanted anybody around, right?
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
and it's such a facade when they go out in public, and then your friends and other, associates are like, I don't know what you're talking about. She seems as lovely as she can be.
Oh, yes, yes. And that's how it was, because I even remember we had such a big turnout for her. We had dinner after we had her, we had a memorial talk for her, and then, remembering everything about her. And then we had dinner for everybody, and we had quite a big turnout. And just to hear people that just thought she was the sweetest thing, and she was just so loving, and it took my mom a while to get over that, because she had treated us so horribly. There was only a few people that really knew how she treated us, that had been close to us over the years. So it was hard, because you don't want to go and be like, oh no, she had just passed away, and then be telling everybody she was just the worst person. So you're like, oh yeah, she was just so sweet and loving. Yes, that's what she was.
Let's switch gears here, okay?
Mhm.
And I'd love to be able to talk about your brother-in-law, because that made major news in Pennsylvania.
Yes. Mhm.
And this was right when the epidemic, we're talking to each other
Yes.
now during the COVID epidemic, but we're slightly now, everybody's opening up. He went
Yes.
overboard.
Yeah. So, it was March 16th, and Sean was still out here in Colorado, and I was in Pennsylvania with my daughter and my grandsons. And my daughter is pounding on my door. So we're told that there's an incident and that we should get out of the house because something's happened with my brother-in-law. I get in touch with my mom, who she only lives about 5 minutes away from me. And she came over, and I was going to go over to her apartment. And while we're getting ready, the state police show up. They tell me I need to get out of the house, that, if I have somewhere to go, it's probably best, because my brother-in-law was, on the loose. They were trying to find him. I asked them, what happened. Well, of course, they couldn't tell me. And I said, did he do something to his girlfriend? And they looked at me. They just gave me this look that I knew, and I knew that he most likely killed her. And he was high on meth. He was convinced that he was trying to align the planets, because I guess there was some sort of aligning the planets that did actually take place, but he thought he was the one that was doing it. So it was just his son was in the house, and I don't know. It was just such a crazy experience for us to have to go through, dealing with a family member on drugs, and my husband repeatedly calling the police to get them to do something about it. And nobody took us seriously. Yes, because he had threatened our life. He had come to our property in Pennsylvania, done damage to our property. So my husband actually had to take him to court for that, but he never showed up.
How do you all stay as and as stable as you do? What is your driving force? Is it your faith? Is it what is it?
Yeah, I believe for me, I've discussed with you that I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And so for me, I think that's why, despite the problems in my marriage, we've stuck it out. We've been married 26 years, despite just all these issues that we've had to deal with. We just, pray a lot and try to just do the best that we can, because that's all, God expects of us, just to give our best. Yeah. And so I really think that's just what keeps us going, because otherwise I don't even know where we'd be today.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
And thank you so much for having me.